I arrived at Jefferson Elementary for my 6-year-old son, Tommy's first school play debut, as a tree in the seasons change. My excitement turned to horror when I discovered Tommy standing backstage in regular clothes, tears streaming down his face. Other children wore elaborate costumes while Tommy explained through sobs that Grandma Carol and Grandpa Bob took his tree costume this morning, claiming my sister Jennifer's twins needed it more for their important roles. The betrayal hit me like a sledgehammer as I realized my parents deliberately sabotaged my son's moment. I rushed to Tommy's side, my heart breaking, as I watched other 6-year-olds parade around in their beautiful costumes. Mrs. Henderson, the drama teacher, had spent weeks helping each child perfect their roles. Tommy had been practicing his tree lines for months, swaying his arms like branches and reciting his dialogue about changing seasons. "Daddy, why did Grandma take my costume?" Tommy's voice cracked as he wiped his nose on his sleeve. His brown eyes, so much like his mother Sarah's, searched my face for answers I didn't have. I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother's number with shaking fingers. Carol answered on the third ring, her voice artificially sweet. "Oh, hello, Frederick. How's the little play going?" "Mom, where is Tommy's costume? He's supposed to go on stage in 20 minutes. A pause. Then that familiar tone she used whenever she was caught doing something wrong. "Oh my goodness! Did we mix those up?" Jennifer called this morning in a panic. The twins had some emergency with their costumes for their school production. They have lead roles, you know. Much bigger parts than Tommy's little tree thing. My jaw clenched. What other school production? Jennifer never mentioned any play. Well, you know how these things are. Children's theater is so complicated. I'm sure we can sort this out later. Maybe Tommy can just wear his regular clothes. I'm sure no one will notice. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, fury building in my chest like a pressure cooker ready to explode. This wasn't the first time. Last month, my parents missed Tommy's 6th birthday party because Jennifer's daughter Ashley had a dance recital the same weekend. They drove 3 hours to watch Ashley perform, but couldn't manage the 15-minute drive to our house for Tommy's celebration. When I called to ask where they were, Dad Bob chuckled and said birthday parties happened every year. But Ashley's solo performance was once in a lifetime. 2 weeks before that, they canceled our planned zoo trip because Jennifer needed them to babysit, while she and her husband Marcus went to a wine tasting. Tommy had been talking about seeing the new tiger exhibit for weeks. When I explained this to my mother, she sighed dramatically and said I was being inflexible about family priorities. Christmas last year still burned in my memory. Tommy opened his gift from Grandma and Grandpa to find a small box of generic crayons and a coloring book from the dollar store. Jennifer's twins, Ashley and Blake, unwrapped iPads, new bicycles, and gaming systems. When Tommy asked why his present was different, Carol patted his head dismissively and said, "Santa knows different children need different things, sweetie." The pattern had started 2 years ago when my wife Sarah died in that car accident. I was working late at my accounting firm reviewing quarterly reports for a major client. Sarah was driving home from her book club when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car. She died instantly. My parents blamed me, not the drunk driver, me. "If you had been a better husband, she would have been home safe," my father said at the funeral. "If you hadn't been so obsessed with making money, she wouldn't have been driving alone at night." My mother nodded in agreement. "Sarah always said you worked too much." Maybe this is God's way of teaching you what really matters. Their words cut deeper than the grief itself. I threw myself into providing for them, financially desperate to prove I wasn't the selfish son they claimed I was. I paid their mortgage, covered their car loans, managed their investments, and funded their lifestyle. I became their personal ATM, hoping money could buy back their love and approval. But it was never enough. Every dollar I gave them seemed to flow directly to Jennifer's family. Every sacrifice I made for their comfort translated into more privileges for my sister's children and more neglect for Tommy. Mrs. Patterson, the school principal, approached us with a concerned expression. She was a kind woman in her 50s who had taught elementary school for over 20 years. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her warm brown eyes reflected genuine care for every student. "Frederick, is everything all right? Tommy seems upset." I opened my mouth to explain, but Mrs. Patterson held up her hand gently. "Actually, let me show you something first." She pulled out her tablet and tapped the screen several times. "I was reviewing our security footage from this morning because we had reports of unauthorized adults in the building." She turned the tablet toward me and I watched in disbelief as my parents walked into Tommy's classroom at 7:45 this morning. The timestamp showed they arrived before school even started. Carol spoke to Tommy's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, while Bob stood near the costume rack. I watched my father deliberately take Tommy's tree costume from its labeled hook and stuff it into a large shopping bag. They told Mrs. Rodriguez there was a family emergency and they needed to collect Tommy's costume for alterations. Mrs. Patterson continued. Mrs. Rodriguez believed them naturally. She had no reason to doubt grandparents acting on behalf of their grandchild. My hands shook as I watched the footage replay. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a mix-up. This was premeditated sabotage. My parents had driven to Tommy's school before Dawn lied to his teacher and stolen his costume to ensure he would be humiliated on his special day. "The strange thing is," Mrs. Patterson said quietly, "I called the other elementary schools in our district to coordinate timing for their productions. None of them have plays scheduled this week. In fact, most schools finished their fall productions last month." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Jennifer's twins weren't in any play. There was no costume emergency. My parents had deliberately destroyed Tommy's first theatrical experience for no reason other than their own cruelty. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you a huge favor," I said, my voice barely steady. "Do you have any art supplies or fabric we could use to make a quick costume? I refuse to let my son miss his debut because of my family's games." Her face brightened immediately. "Absolutely, let's get to work." Mrs. Patterson led Tommy and me to the art room where we found rolls of brown construction paper, green fabric scraps, and a glue gun. The other children were getting final makeup touches backstage, their excited chatter drifting down the hallway. "We can make this work, buddy," I told Tommy, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "Sometimes the best costumes are the ones we create ourselves." Tommy's tears had stopped, replaced by curious determination. He helped me cut strips of brown paper, while Mrs. Patterson fashioned branches from wire and green fabric. In 30 minutes, we created a tree costume that was definitely homemade but filled with love and creativity. "I look like a real tree daddy." Tommy spun around his paper, bark rustling softly. The costume wasn't perfect, but his smile was radiant. The play began at 7:30. I sat in the third row, my phone recording every second as Tommy took the stage with his classmates. He swayed his arms gracefully, delivered his lines about autumn changes with perfect timing, and beamed with pride when the audience applauded. Around me, other parents murmured sympathetically about Tommy's obviously improvised costume, but their faces showed admiration for how well he performed despite the circumstances. Mrs. Chen, whose daughter played a flower, leaned over to whisper, "That little boy has such stage presence. His costume is creative and unique." Tommy's performance was flawless. He remembered every word, every movement, every cue. When he took his final bow, the audience gave him extra applause, and I felt my heart swell with pride and break with anger simultaneously. As the children filed off stage for the reception in the gymnasium, I heard familiar voices near the entrance. My stomach dropped as I turned to see my parents walking in with Jennifer's entire family. Carol wore her best dress, and Bob sported a blazer he usually reserved for church. Jennifer looked irritated, checking her phone constantly, while her husband Marcus herded their 7-year-old twins through the crowd. Ashley and Blake Jennifer's children wore expensive matching outfits that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Ashley had perfectly curled blonde hair with a designer headband, while Blake sported a new haircut and shoes that looked fresh from the box. "There's our little star," Carol called out loudly, but she wasn't looking at Tommy. She was waving at Ashley and Blake, who weren't even in the production. My parents approached our group acting as if nothing unusual had happened. Bob clapped me on the shoulder with his usual forced joviality. "Great little show, Frederick. How did our boy do?" "Our boy did beautifully despite having his costume stolen this morning," I replied evenly. Carol gasped dramatically, pressing her hand to her chest. "Oh my goodness. Is that what happened? We were just trying to help Jennifer with her emergency. These costume mix-ups happen all the time." "What emergency was that exactly?" I asked, looking directly at Jennifer. Jennifer barely glanced up from her phone. "What? Oh, the costume thing. Yeah, the kids needed something for their school thing." "It's not a big deal, Frederick. You're being dramatic." "What school thing Mrs. Patterson called every elementary school in the district? Nobody has plays this week." Jennifer's face reddened slightly, but she shrugged with practiced indifference. "Look, I don't know all the details. Mom said you guys had extra costumes, so I said sure. It's just a stupid elementary school play. Tommy will get over it." Bob chuckled, the same dismissive laugh I'd heard my entire life whenever my feelings or needs were minimized. "The kid needs to learn that life isn't fair sometimes, builds character. He'll get over it." Ashley tugged on Carol's sleeve, pointing at Tommy's paper costume. "Grandma, why does Tommy look so weird? His costume looks like garbage." Blake giggled and added, "Yeah, it looks like he made it out of trash." Instead of correcting their rudeness, my parents laughed along with Jennifer and Marcus. Carol even ruffled Ashley's perfectly styled hair affectionately. "Children say the funniest things," she cooed. "Don't mind them, Tommy. They're just being silly." Tommy's face fell, his earlier joy evaporating, as he looked down at his homemade costume with fresh eyes. The paper that had seemed magical an hour ago now felt cheap and embarrassing under his cousin's mockery. Mrs. Patterson appeared beside us, having witnessed the entire exchange. Her principal instincts kicked in immediately. "Tommy, could you come help me with something special in my office? I have a certificate for outstanding performance that needs a very talented young actor to carry it." Tommy perked up slightly and followed her toward the hallway, giving me a moment alone with my family. "Before I forget," Carol said, reaching into her purse, "we brought Tommy a special gift. We picked it out just for him." She handed me a small wrapped package, smiling as if she had done something wonderful. The wrapping paper was clearly from the dollar store, thin and creased from hasty handling. "Why don't you open it for him?" Bob suggested. "We want to see his reaction." Something in their expressions made my skin crawl, but I tore open the paper while they watched expectantly. Inside was a small toy car, the kind sold in grocery store checkout lanes. But what made my blood run cold was the clearance sticker, still attached, original price $12.99, marked down to $3.49. Worse than the obviously cheap gift was the handwritten note tucked inside the box. In Carol's careful cursive, it read, "Keep your expectations low, sweetie. Life isn't fair. Love Grandma and Grandpa." The other parents nearby stopped their conversation, staring at the note in shocked silence. Mrs. Chen's mouth fell open. Mr. Rodriguez, whose son played a pumpkin, shook his head in disgust. Jennifer glanced at the note and snorted with laughter. "Oh my God, Mom, that's hilarious. You actually wrote that." "Well, it's true," Carol said defensively. The sooner children learn that life doesn't revolve around them, the better adjusted they become. We're doing him a favor. By giving a 6-year-old a clearance toy with a note telling him to expect nothing, Mrs. Chen couldn't contain herself anymore. What kind of grandparents deliberately crush their grandchild's spirit? Bob's face darkened at the criticism from a stranger. "Mind your own business, lady. We know how to raise children. Been doing it a lot longer than you have." "Apparently not very well," Mr. Rodriguez muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. The entire reception had gone quiet, all attention focused on our family drama. Parents pulled their children closer, instinctively protecting them from the toxicity radiating from my parents and sister. Jennifer looked around at the judgmental faces and rolled her eyes dramatically. God, you people are uptight. It's just a joke. Tommy's fine. Kids are resilient. He's 6 years old, Mrs. Patterson said firmly, returning with Tommy and hearing the tail end of the conversation. 6-year-olds are not resilient to deliberate emotional cruelty from the adults who are supposed to love them unconditionally. Carol's fake sweet demeanor cracked slightly. How dare you judge our parenting? We raised 2 successful children. Did you? Mrs. Patterson asked pointedly. Because from where I stand, I see grandparents who sabotaged their grandchild's special day, gave him a deliberately hurtful gift, and are now defending emotional abuse as character building. The room buzzed with whispered conversations as other parents shared their disgust. I saw several people taking photos of the clearance toy and note undoubtedly to share with their spouses later. Tommy looked confused and hurt, sensing the tension but not understanding the adult dynamics at play. He clutched his performance certificate and looked between his grandparents and me with uncertainty. "Daddy, can we go home now?" he whispered. I picked him up, holding him close as I made a decision that would change everything. "Yes, buddy, we're going home, right now." As I carried Tommy toward the exit, I heard Bob call after me. "Don't be so sensitive, Frederick. He'll get over it. Kids always do." But this time I didn't look back. At home, I tucked Tommy into bed with extra care, reading him 3 stories instead of our usual one. He seemed smaller somehow, curled up in his dinosaur pajamas with his stuffed elephant pressed against his chest. "Daddy," he said softly as I turned off his bedside lamp. "Why don't Grandma and Grandpa love me like they love Ashley and Blake?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. How do you explain adult dysfunction to a 6-year-old? How do you tell your child that his grandparents are emotionally damaged, people who use favoritism as a weapon? "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, buddy," I said carefully. "It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. You're perfect exactly as you are. But why do they always choose Ashley and Blake for everything? Why did they take my costume?" I sat back down on his bed, my heart breaking at the confusion in his voice. "I don't know, Tommy, but I promise you this. I will always choose you. I will always protect you. And I will never let anyone hurt you like this again." He nodded sleepily, trusting me completely in that way only children can. Within minutes, his breathing became deep and regular, but I stayed beside his bed, long after he fell asleep, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest, and making silent promises about the changes that were coming. Once I was certain Tommy was deeply asleep, I went to my home office and powered up my laptop. The emotional weight of the evening pressed down on me, but underneath the hurt and anger, a cold clarity was emerging. For 2 years, I'd been bleeding money to support parents who blamed me for my wife's death. For 2 years, I'd enabled their financial comfort, while they systematically destroyed my son's self-worth. For 2 years, I'd told myself that family loyalty meant accepting abuse and writing checks to cover the guilt I carried about Sarah's accident. Tonight, all of that ended. I opened my financial management software and began reviewing every account, every payment, every dollar that flowed from my income to their lifestyle. What I found made me physically ill. Over the past 5 years, I had paid them $847,000 in direct financial support. The numbers stared back at me from the screen like an indictment of my own enabling behavior. Mortgage payments $3,200 monthly for 48 months. I'd been covering their housing costs for 4 solid years, totaling $153,600. Car loan payments $650 monthly for both of their vehicles. I'd paid for 2 car loans simultaneously, contributing $39,000 over 5 years. Insurance premiums $420 monthly for auto homeowners and supplemental health coverage. $25,200 in insurance costs. Utility bills $380 monthly average for electricity, gas, water, cable, and internet. $22,800 to keep their lights on and their entertainment running. Medical expenses $23,000, for Bob's heart surgery, Carol's dental work prescription medications, and various specialist appointments. Vacation funding $18,000 for their European cruise last year, plus smaller trips to visit Jennifer's family and weekend getaways. Investment account management, I had generated $156,000 in gains for their retirement portfolio through careful stock selection and market timing. Emergency fund, $45,000 I'd built up for their security and peace of mind. The most crushing discovery came when I reviewed the recent bank statements. For the past 3 months, my parents had been systematically transferring money from the accounts I managed into a separate account they shared with Jennifer. $12,000 had disappeared into Jennifer's household budget, while they told me they needed more help with their own expenses. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the financial devastation I'd enabled. Nearly $1 million of support for people who repaid my generosity by sabotaging my son's happiness and treating him like a second-class grandchild. But the money was only part of the story. I pulled out a notebook and began documenting the pattern of emotional abuse that had accelerated since Sarah's death. Tommy's 6th birthday party, parents missed it for Ashley's dance recital, sent a generic card with $5 inside. Christmas gift disparity, Tommy received dollar store items while Ashley and Blake got expensive electronics and toys. School events. Parents attended every one of Ashley and Blake's activities, but missed Tommy's soccer games, school conferences and art shows. Holiday visits. Always scheduled around Jennifer's family's convenience, never ours. Tommy was expected to adapt to whatever worked for his cousins. Disciplined, double-standard Ashley and Blake could do no wrong while Tommy was criticized for normal childhood behavior like being too loud or asking too many questions. The costume theft was just the latest and most blatant example of favoritism that had been building for 2 years. I thought about Sarah lying in that hospital bed, machines beeping around her as she fought for her life. Her last coherent words to me were, "Promise me you'll protect our boy Frederick. Don't let anyone hurt him." I had failed that promise. In my grief and guilt, I'd allowed toxic people to remain in Tommy's life because they were blood relatives. I'd funded their lifestyle while they poisoned my son's sense of self-worth. But Sarah's death wasn't my fault, no matter what my parents claimed. A drunk driver killed my wife, not my work schedule. And my parents' inability to process their grief healthily wasn't something I could fix with money. I opened another browser window and began researching legal options for severing financial ties. As an accountant, I understood the mechanics of loans, investments, and financial power of attorney arrangements. What I needed to verify was my legal right to withdraw from voluntary support agreements. An hour later, I had my answer. Every financial commitment I'd made was voluntary. I wasn't legally obligated to pay their mortgage, car loans, or living expenses. I could withdraw from every agreement with proper notice. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Mom said you were weird about the costume thing tonight. Don't be dramatic. Kids need to learn disappointment. Also, Marcus and I are applying for a mortgage this week, and we need you to co-sign. Our credit isn't quite there yet. Can you stop by the bank Friday?" I stared at the message, amazed by her complete lack of self-awareness. She'd participated in humiliating my son, defended it as character building, and now wanted me to commit to hundreds of thousands of dollars in financial liability for her family. The audacity was breathtaking, but it also crystallized my resolve. I spent the next hour researching the process for removing myself from co-signed loans, transferring investment accounts, and revoking financial power of attorney. By 2 a.m, I had a complete action plan. Tomorrow, I would systematically dismantle every financial connection that bound me to people who treated my son like an afterthought. Tomorrow, I would choose Tommy over family loyalty. Tomorrow, I would finally honor the promise I made to Sarah. I closed my laptop and checked on Tommy one more time. He was sleeping peacefully, his tree costume folded carefully on his dresser chair where he'd placed it before bed. Despite everything, he was proud of his performance. "I won't let them hurt you anymore, buddy," I whispered into the darkness. And I meant it. I called in sick to work the next morning, something I'd done maybe 3 times in the past decade. My business partner Gary covered my client meetings without question, sensing the gravity in my voice when I briefly explained that I was dealing with a family crisis. After dropping Tommy at school with extra hugs and reassurances that his performance had been perfect, I drove directly to my lawyer's office. Rachel Martinez had been handling my legal affairs since Sarah's death, including the complicated process of managing my wife's estate and ensuring Tommy's financial security. Rachel's office occupied the 3rd floor of a restored Victorian building downtown. Her walls were lined with law degrees, family photos, and awards from various professional organizations. She was a sharp woman in her early 40s who specialized in family law and financial planning. "Frederick, you sounded urgent on the phone," she said, gesturing for me to sit in the leather chair across from her mahogany desk. "What's happening?" I spent the next hour detailing the pattern of financial support, emotional abuse, and the previous night's costume sabotage. Rachel listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. "Let me make sure I understand," she said when I finished. "You've been voluntarily supporting your parents financially for 5 years, totaling nearly $850,000. In exchange, they've systematically favored your sister's children over your son and blame you for your wife's death. Last night, they deliberately sabotaged Tommy's school play and gave him a gift designed to hurt his feelings." "That's exactly right, and now Jennifer wants me to co-sign their mortgage, which would put me on the hook for potentially $300,000 in additional liability." Rachel leaned back in her chair, shaking her head slowly. "Frederick, I've seen a lot of toxic family dynamics in my practice, but this level of coordinated emotional abuse is particularly disturbing. The fact that they're targeting a 6-year-old makes it even worse. What are my legal options for cutting off financial support?" "Excellent news on that front. Every financial arrangement you've described is voluntary. You're not married to your parents, you don't have any court-ordered support obligations, and they're not disabled or incapacitated. You can terminate every single financial arrangement with appropriate notice." She pulled out a thick folder and began reviewing documents. "Let's look at your specific commitments. The mortgage you co-signed, the car loans, the investment accounts you manage under power of attorney, the insurance policies where you're the payer. All of these can be legally severed. What about the co-signed loans? Can I really remove myself from those?" "Absolutely. You have the right to withdraw from co-signer arrangements, especially when the primary borrowers have sufficient income to qualify independently or can find alternative financing. The lenders might require your parents to refinance, but that's their responsibility, not yours." Rachel opened her laptop and began typing. "I'm going to draft formal notifications for each financial institution. These letters will document your intention to withdraw from all voluntary financial support, remove yourself from co-signed obligations, and revoke any power of attorney arrangements. Everything will be legally bulletproof." "How quickly can this happen?" "Most of it can be initiated today. Bank transfers, investment account changes, insurance cancellations, these can happen within hours. The loan modifications might take a few days to process, but your liability ends the moment you file the notifications." I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't realized was there. For 5 years, I'd carried the financial responsibility for 3 adults, plus 2 children who weren't even my own. The monthly stress of managing multiple households had become so normal I'd forgotten what it felt like to only worry about Tommy and myself. "What should I expect in terms of their reaction?" I asked. Rachel's expression grew serious. "Based on what you've told me, they've been financially dependent on you for years. When that support disappears overnight, expect panic, anger, and manipulation. They'll likely try guilt threats and emotional blackmail to maintain the status quo. What if they claim I'm abandoning them in their old age?" "Frederick, your parents are in their early 60s, healthy, and own a house. They're not elderly or infirm. You've been enabling their lifestyle choices, not supporting genuine need. There's a difference between helping family during emergencies and subsidizing people who take your generosity for granted. She handed me a business card. This is a colleague who specializes in family therapy and toxic relationship dynamics. Given what Tommy has experienced, you might consider counseling to help him process the situation and set healthy boundaries moving forward. Dr. Williams's office was my next stop. I'd been seeing him sporadically since Sarah's death, working through grief and guilt about the accident. He was a calm man in his 50s with gray hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. "The costume incident was a turning point for you," he observed after I explained the situation. "It was seeing Tommy's face when he asked why his grandparents don't love him like they love his cousins. I realized I've been prioritizing my parents' comfort over my son's emotional well-being. Guilt about Sarah's death has been driving your financial support, hasn't it?" I nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest. "They blamed me for the accident. Said if I'd been a better husband, she would have been home safe. I threw money at them, hoping to prove I wasn't selfish, that I could take care of everyone. But financial generosity didn't change their opinion of you, did it? And it certainly didn't protect Tommy from their favoritism. No, if anything, it enabled them to treat us worse because they knew I wouldn't cut them off." Dr. Williams leaned forward slightly. "Frederick, what would Sarah think about your parents' treatment of Tommy?" The question hit me like a lightning bolt. Sarah had been fiercely protective of family, but she'd also been intolerant of bullying or favoritism. She would have confronted my parents directly after the first incident of treating Tommy differently from his cousins. "She would have shut this down immediately," I said quietly. "She never would have let them get away with hurting Tommy to make a point about my supposed failures as a husband. So protecting Tommy from emotional abuse isn't betraying Sarah's memory. It's honoring it." I left Dr. Williams's office with a clearer sense of purpose than I'd felt in months. The guilt that had driven my financial support was based on my parents' manipulation, not reality. Sarah died because a drunk driver ran a red light, not because I worked late that night. My phone rang as I sat in the parking lot outside the medical building. Jennifer's name appeared on the screen. "Frederick, I need to talk to you about this mortgage thing," she said without preamble. "The bank wants to meet Friday afternoon to finalize the co-signing paperwork. Can you be there at 3? Jennifer, I'm not co-signing your mortgage." A pause. Then her voice took on the wheedling tone she'd used since childhood when she wanted something. "Come on, don't be like that. Family helps family. You helped Mom and Dad with their house. And look how well that worked out. They used my financial support to fund your household while treating my son like garbage. Oh my God, you're still upset about the costume thing. Tommy's fine. Kids bounce back from everything. Tommy asked me last night why his grandparents don't love him like they love Ashley and Blake. Does that sound fine to you? Look, Mom and Dad have always favored me. That's just how they are. It doesn't mean anything." The casual way she dismissed decades of favoritism and its impact on Tommy infuriated me. It means everything to a 6-year-old who doesn't understand why his family treats him differently. Whatever. The point is, Marcus and I need this mortgage. Our lease is up next month and we can't find anywhere else in our price range. If you don't co-sign, we might have to move in with Mom and Dad. The threat was obvious. If I didn't enable Jennifer's financial irresponsibility, my parents would have to deal with her family living in their house. But that was their choice to make, not my problem to solve. Then I guess you better start looking at apartments you can actually afford, I said. Frederick, don't be an asshole about this. We're family. Family doesn't sabotage 6-year-olds' school plays. Family doesn't give children gifts designed to hurt their feelings. Family doesn't blame people for their spouse's death and then demand financial support. Fine, be selfish, but don't come crying to me when Mom and Dad write you out of their will. I almost laughed. Jennifer, there won't be anything left to inherit. Mom and Dad have been living off my money for 5 years. Their house, their cars, their lifestyle, their retirement accounts, All of it depends on my support. Take that away, and there's no estate to fight over." "What do you mean, take that away?" I ended the call without answering. Jennifer would find out soon enough what I meant. By 6 that evening, I had executed every step of my financial separation plan. Bank accounts were transferred. Investment portfolios were moved to my sole control. Insurance policies were canceled. Loan co-signing agreements were formally terminated with the appropriate legal notices. The only thing left was to wait for my family to discover that their financial safety net had disappeared. I didn't have to wait long. Tommy was at his best friend Nathan's house for a sleepover, giving me the evening to finalize the last details of my financial withdrawal. I sat in my home office surrounded by confirmation emails and legal documents that represented the end of 5 years of enabling dysfunction. At exactly 6 o'clock, I initiated the final sequence of cuts. First, I called the mortgage company that held my parents' home loan. As a co-signer, I had the legal right to remove myself from the obligation with 30 days' notice provided the primary borrowers met certain income requirements. Since both my parents received Social Security and my father had a small pension, they qualified to carry the loan independently. "Mr. Thompson, I need to formally withdraw as co-signer on account number 478923. I told the customer service representative. "I can process that request, sir. The primary borrowers will need to qualify for the remaining balance independently. If they don't meet our current lending standards, they'll have 30 days to refinance with another institution or find an alternative co-signer." "I understand. Please send all documentation to my attorney." I provided Rachel's contact information and confirmed the withdrawal would be effective immediately. Next came the auto loans. Both my parents drove cars. I'd helped finance a 2-year-old sedan for my mother and a pickup truck for my father. Combined, the monthly payments totaled $650. The process was similar. 30 days notice income verification required for the primary borrowers. My liability terminated upon proper notification. The loan companies were professional and efficient, treating it as routine paperwork rather than a family crisis. By 6:45, I'd contacted the insurance companies that carried my parents' policies. Auto insurance, homeowners coverage, and supplemental health insurance all paid automatically from my business account each month. I canceled my payment authorization and transferred policy ownership back to my parents. They had 30 days to establish their own payment arrangements or find new coverage. The utility companies were next. Electricity, gas, water, cable, and internet services for my parents' house, all charged to my credit card for convenience. I removed my payment information and notified each company that the account holders were responsible for their own bills going forward. At 7:15, I accessed the investment accounts I'd managed under financial power of attorney. Over 5 years, I'd grown my parents' retirement portfolio from $80,000 to nearly $300,000 through careful stock selection and strategic rebalancing. Every transaction had been legal and beneficial to them, but it was time to transfer control back where it belonged. I moved all funds to new accounts in their names, only sending them the access codes and account information by certified mail. They would receive full ownership of investments worth significantly more than when I'd started managing them, but they'd need to handle future decisions themselves. The emergency fund was the easiest transfer. $45,000 I'd accumulated for their peace of mind moved to their personal savings account with a simple wire transfer. They now had nearly a year's worth of living expenses in liquid savings, more than most retirees their age. At 8:30, I called the travel agency that had booked my parents' upcoming European river cruise. The trip was my anniversary gift to them, $8,400 for a 2-week journey through Germany and Austria in the spring. "I need to cancel reservation number RT4479, I told the agent. "Full cancellation with refund, please." "Sir, that's a significant booking. Are you sure about canceling?" Completely sure. How quickly can you process the refund? The funds will be back in your account within 3 to 5 business days. Finally, at 9 o'clock, I completed the most important step, formally revoking the financial power of attorney that had given me legal authority over my parents' financial affairs. I faxed the revocation notice to their bank, their financial advisor, and every institution where I'd acted on their behalf. As of 9 o'clock that evening, I was financially and legally separated from my parents' lifestyle. They owned their investments, controlled their own accounts, and were responsible for their own expenses. I had given them more than enough money and assets to live comfortably, but I would never again subsidize people who treated my son cruelly. My phone remained silent through the entire process, which surprised me. Usually my parents called several times each evening to discuss financial matters, investment strategies, or upcoming expenses they wanted me to cover. Tonight, nothing. At 9:47, the first automated notification arrived. A text message from their bank: insufficient funds for scheduled mortgage payment. Please contact customer service to update payment information. 3 minutes later, another notification. Auto insurance payment declined. Policy cancellation will occur in 72 hours without updated payment method. Then a third, utility payment authorization not found. Service interruption possible without immediate payment arrangement. The automated messages continued arriving every few minutes, each one representing another severed financial connection. I watched them accumulate on my phone with a mixture of satisfaction and nervousness. Soon, my parents would realize their comfortable lifestyle had disappeared overnight. At 10:35, the first human contact arrived. A text from my mother. Frederick, something's wrong with our accounts. The bank called about the mortgage payment. Can you check on this? I didn't respond. She would figure out what happened soon enough. 5 minutes later, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. At 10:41, my mother sent another text. Why is everything canceled? The cruise, the insurance, everything. What's happening? This time I replied with a single sentence: Tommy and I will no longer be funding your lifestyle. My phone exploded with activity. Calls from both parents, texts from Jennifer, voicemails demanding explanations and threatening legal action. I turned off the sound and let them cycle through their panic without my participation. At 11:15, they escalated to physical confrontation. I heard car doors slamming in my driveway, followed by aggressive knocking on my front door. When I didn't answer immediately, the knocking became pounding. Frederick, open this door right now, my father's voice boomed through the wood. We need to talk about this financial nonsense. I activated my Ring doorbell camera and spoke through the intercom. Tommy's sleeping. We'll talk tomorrow. We'll talk right now. Bob's face was red with anger as he stared into the camera. You can't just cut off our support without warning that money is practically ours. Actually, it was always mine. I was sharing it voluntarily, and now I'm not. Carol appeared next to Bob, tears streaming down her face. Honey, please don't do this. We're your parents. Family takes care of family. Family doesn't sabotage their grandchild's school play and then give him gifts designed to hurt his feelings. That was just a misunderstanding about the costume. You're overreacting. The security footage shows you deliberately taking Tommy's costume before school started. There was no misunderstanding. Jennifer's voice joined the chaos as her car pulled into my driveway. Frederick, you're being ridiculous. Open the door so we can fix this. Within minutes, my entire extended family was standing on my front porch, demanding entry and financial restoration. Their voices grew louder and more aggressive as they realized I wasn't going to back down. You're abandoning us in our old age, Carol sobbed dramatically. You're financially abusing elderly parents, Bob shouted. You're destroying our family, Jennifer added. The commotion was loud enough to wake neighbors. I saw porch lights turning on up and down the street as people investigated the disturbance. Mrs. Foster from next door peered through her curtains with obvious concern. At 11:50, I made a decision that surprised even me. "I'm calling the police," I announced through the doorbell speaker. "You wouldn't dare," Bob sputtered. "Watch me." I dialed 911 and reported a disturbance at my address. 3 adults were creating a public nuisance, disturbing the peace, and refusing to leave my property despite requests to do so. The response time was impressive. Within 8 minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived with lights flashing. Officers Martinez and Davis approached my front porch with professional calm, assessing the situation quickly. "What seems to be the problem here?" Officer Martinez asked. Bob immediately tried to take control of the narrative. "This is our son, and he's having some kind of breakdown. He's cut off our financial support without warning, and we're just trying to talk sense into him." "Sir, are you the homeowner?" Officer Davis asked me through the doorbell intercom. "Yes, I am. These people are my family members, but I've asked them to leave my property. They're refusing and making enough noise to wake my 6-year-old son." Officer Martinez turned back to my parents and sister. "If the homeowner has asked you to leave, you need to respect that request. This is private property." "But we're family," Carol protested. "He can't just call the police on his own parents." "Ma'am, family relationships don't override property rights," Officer Davis explained patiently. "If you continue to disturb the peace or refuse to leave when asked, we'll have to consider other options." The threat of actual consequences finally penetrated their anger. Bob's bluster deflated slightly, and Carol stopped her theatrical sobbing. "This isn't over, Frederick," Jennifer said, as they walked toward their cars. "You can't treat family like this and expect no consequences." "Actually, I replied through the intercom. "It's called having boundaries." After my family drove away, Officer Martinez approached the doorbell camera one more time. "Sir, are you safe inside? Do you need any additional assistance?" "I'm fine, officer. Thank you for your quick response." "If they return and cause problems, don't hesitate to call again. You have the right to peaceful enjoyment of your property." As the patrol cars disappeared down my street, I sat in my quiet living room and realized something profound had just happened. For the first time in 5 years, I had chosen my son's well-being over my family's demands. I had set boundaries and enforced them with real consequences. The financial separation was complete. The emotional separation had begun. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I felt something I hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. The peace that comes from making the right choice even when it's difficult. The next morning arrived with unusual quiet. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, but I ignored them all while making Tommy pancakes shaped like trees. He was still glowing from his successful performance, chattering about how Mrs. Patterson had complimented his stage presence. "Daddy, can I be in more plays?" he asked carefully, cutting his pancake tree into bite-sized pieces. "Absolutely, buddy. We'll sign you up for the Community Theater's youth program. They have classes every Saturday." His face lit up with excitement, and I realized this was exactly the kind of conversation I should be having with my son. Plans for his future encouragement of his interests, celebration of his talents, not managing the financial demands of adults who treated him poorly. At 8:30, I dropped Tommy at school and drove to my office. My business partner Gary was waiting with coffee and a concerned expression. "How's the family crisis?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. I spent 20 minutes explaining the situation while Gary listened with increasing disbelief. "Let me get this straight," he said when I finished. "You've been supporting your parents financially for 5 years, and they repaid your generosity by sabotaging Tommy's school play. That's the simplified version, but yes. And you cut them off completely last night. Every dollar, every account, every automatic payment. They're financially independent as of yesterday evening." Gary leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Frederick, I've been your business partner for 8 years. I've watched you sacrifice your own financial goals to support people who never appreciated it. This is the best decision you've ever made." "You really think so?" "I know so." You're an accountant for crying out loud. You understand better than anyone that enabling financial irresponsibility doesn't help people, it hurts them. Your parents need to learn to live within their means, and your sister needs to find her own co-signer. Gary's validation meant more than I expected. He'd witnessed my stress about family financial obligations for years, offering tactful suggestions about setting boundaries that I'd always ignored. What should I expect now? I asked. More manipulation, more guilt trips, probably some threats about legal action they can't actually pursue. They'll try everything to restore the status quo before accepting that their free ride is over. At 10:15, my prediction came true. Rachel called from her law office. Frederick, I just received a very interesting call from someone claiming to be your father. He wanted to know if you had legal grounds to steal his retirement money. What did you tell him? I explained that I couldn't discuss your legal affairs with third parties without your permission. Then I suggested he consult his own attorney if he had concerns about financial transactions. Did he threaten legal action? He implied it, but I doubt he'll follow through. Everything you did yesterday was completely legal. You transferred assets you owned to accounts in their names, removed yourself from voluntary financial obligations, and revoked power of attorney arrangements. No court would consider any of that theft or financial abuse. At noon, I received a surprise visitor. Dr. Williams called to ask if I could come in for an emergency session. Apparently, my mother had contacted his office, claiming I was having a mental breakdown and needed immediate intervention. She seemed very concerned about your psychological state, Dr. Williams said when I arrived at his office. She suggested I might want to schedule an urgent evaluation. What did you tell her? That I couldn't discuss my patients with anyone without written consent, and that if she had concerns about your well-being, she should encourage you to seek support through appropriate channels. We spent the next hour reviewing my emotional state and decision-making process. Dr. Williams confirmed what I already knew: cutting off financial enablement was a healthy boundary, not a mental health crisis. Your mother's call was actually quite revealing, he observed. Instead of reflecting on why you might want to distance yourself from them, she immediately assumed you were mentally unstable. That suggests a pattern of deflecting responsibility for her behavior. At 2 o'clock, the situation escalated dramatically. Jennifer appeared in my office lobby demanding to speak with me immediately. Gary intercepted her before she could reach my door. Ma'am, you need to calm down or I'll have to call security, he said firmly. I need to talk to my brother. He's having some kind of breakdown and making crazy financial decisions. I emerged from my office curious to see how far Jennifer would take her desperation. What can I help you with, Jennifer? You can stop this insane tantrum and restore mom and dad's accounts. They called me crying this morning because they can't pay their bills. They can pay their bills. I transferred enough money to their accounts to cover living expenses for nearly a year. They just can't maintain their current lifestyle without my subsidies. That's the same thing. No, it's not. There's a difference between genuine need and entitled expectation. Jennifer's voice rose to near shouting level. You're abandoning family. You're supposed to take care of your parents. I did take care of them. For 5 years, I gave them almost $1 million in support. In return, they blamed me for Sarah's death and treated my son like he was worthless. That arrangement has ended. Other employees were beginning to stare at our increasingly public confrontation. Gary stepped closer, clearly prepared to intervene if Jennifer became more aggressive. What about my mortgage? She demanded. Marcus and I need a co-signer by Friday or we'll lose the house we want. Then you better find someone else to co-sign or look at houses you can actually afford without my financial backing. You're being selfish and vindictive. I'm being a responsible father who refuses to enable people who hurt his child. Jennifer's face flushed red with anger. Fine. But don't expect any relationship with Ashley and Blake going forward. Don't expect invitations to family events. You've chosen money over family. Actually, I've chosen my son over people who treat him badly, and that includes you. She stormed out of the office, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Gary watched her leave with obvious relief. "Well, that was enlightening," he said dryly. "She has no idea that her children's college funds just became significantly larger because I'm no longer supporting 3 additional adults." The afternoon brought a series of increasingly frantic communications from my parents. Voice messages went from confused to angry to pleading as they realized the scope of the financial changes. At 4:30, Bob called my office directly, bypassing my cell phone. "Frederick, we need to talk like adults about this situation," he said in his most reasonable tone. "I'm listening." "This whole thing is getting out of hand. We understand you're upset about the costume misunderstanding, and we're sorry about that. But cutting off our support is an extreme overreaction." "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Dad. You deliberately took Tommy's costume to hurt him. Look, maybe we made an error in judgment. But that doesn't justify financial abandonment. We're your parents. You have an obligation to help us in our golden years. My obligation is to raise my son in a healthy environment. People who deliberately hurt children don't get continued financial support from me. You're making a huge mistake, son. Family is everything. Money comes and goes, but family is forever." "You're right, Dad. Family should be forever. That's why I'm protecting Tommy from family members who treat him poorly." The call ended with Bob's frustrated silence. By 6 o'clock, my parents had apparently exhausted their direct appeal options and moved to community intervention. Mrs. Patterson called from the school. "Frederick, I received a very strange call this afternoon from people claiming to be Tommy's grandparents. They wanted me to confirm that you were acting erratically and suggested I might want to contact child services about Tommy's well-being." My blood ran cold. "They called the school principal to question my parenting. I told them that Tommy is clearly a well-cared-for child with a devoted father, and that if they had genuine concerns about his welfare, they should address them through appropriate family channels. I also mentioned that I had security footage of them taking his costume, which might not reflect well on their own judgment. The fact that my parents would try to weaponize child services against me for setting financial boundaries was a new low. They were willing to potentially traumatize Tommy with an investigation rather than accept responsibility for their own behavior. At 7:15, they made their final attempt of the day. A knock on my front door revealed my parents standing there with flowers, a bakery cake, and carefully composed expressions of remorse. "We brought peace offerings," Carol said through the Ring camera. "Can we come in and talk like a family? Tommy's doing homework. This isn't a good time." "We'll be quiet. We just want to apologize properly and work out a compromise." Against my better judgment, I opened the door. They entered with the subdued demeanor of people who had finally realized their situation was serious. "We've been thinking about what you said," Bob began carefully. "Maybe we haven't been as fair to Tommy as we should have been. Maybe—" Carol set the cake on my kitchen counter and arranged the flowers in a vase. "We want to make this right, honey. We love Tommy very much." "Then why did you steal his costume and give him a gift designed to hurt his feelings?" They exchanged glances before Bob answered. "We thought we were teaching him resilience. Sometimes kids need to learn that life isn't always fair. He's 6 years old, Dad. He needs to learn that his family loves and supports him unconditionally." "You're right," Carol said quickly. "We see that now. We want to start over with Tommy, be better grandparents." For a moment, I felt the familiar pull of family loyalty and conflict avoidance. These were my parents, flawed but trying to make amends. Maybe we could work through this. Then Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the voices. When he saw his grandparents, his face immediately became guarded and uncertain. "Hi, Grandma. Hi, Grandpa." "Hello, sweetheart," Carol said in an overly bright voice. "We brought you a cake." Tommy looked at the cake suspiciously, then at me for guidance. The wariness in his expression broke my heart. A 6-year-old should be excited to see grandparents with cake, not afraid of what conditions might come with their gifts. "What kind of cake?" Tommy asked cautiously. "Vanilla with chocolate frosting," Bob said. "Your favorite, right?" Tommy's brow furrowed. My favorite is strawberry. An awkward silence fell over the kitchen. After 6 years of being Tommy's grandparents, they didn't even know his favorite cake flavor. But they knew Ashley preferred vanilla and Blake liked chocolate. Well, vanilla is good too, Carol said quickly. Why don't you have a slice? I already had dessert, Tommy said politely. Can I go back to my homework now? After Tommy left the kitchen, my parents' facade began to crack. This is ridiculous, Frederick, Bob said in a low voice. You can't keep our grandson away from us forever. I'm not keeping him away. I'm protecting him from people who treat him as less important than his cousins. We'll do better with the fairness thing, Carol said desperately. But you have to restore our financial support. We can't survive without it. And there it was. The real motivation behind their apology. Not genuine remorse for hurting Tommy, but fear about losing their subsidized lifestyle. The financial support is over permanently, I said firmly. Whether or not you have a relationship with Tommy going forward depends entirely on how you treat him. But we need that money. Carol's voice cracked with panic. No, you want that money? There's a difference. You have Social Security Dad's pension, the investments I grew for you, and the emergency fund I built up. You can live comfortably on that income if you adjust your expectations. What about our mortgage, our cars, our insurance? Your responsibility now, just like every other adult in America. Bob's reasonable demeanor finally shattered. You ungrateful little bastard! After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. What exactly have you done for me? Dad blamed me for Sarah's death, treated my son like a second-class grandchild, stolen his costume to make a point about disappointment. We raised you, we put a roof over your head, we sent you to college. 18 years ago. Since then, I've given you almost $1 million in support. I think we're even. They left without another word, taking their flowers and cake with them. As their car pulled out of my driveway, I realized this was probably the last time I would see them as a united family. But for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with that possibility. The next 3 months transformed our lives in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant stress of managing 3 other adults' financial needs, I discovered energy and resources I'd forgotten I possessed. My relationship with Tommy deepened as I focused entirely on his emotional and developmental needs, rather than splitting my attention between his welfare and his grandparents' demands. Tommy flourished in the new environment. I enrolled him in Saturday morning acting classes at the community theater, where his natural stage presence and memorization skills impressed the instructors. Within weeks, he was cast in a small role in their spring production of Charlotte's Web. This time his costume was professionally made, and he had 2 devoted parents in the audience cheering for his performance. I used the word parents intentionally. Dr. Williams had helped me understand that I needed to honor Sarah's memory by being both mother and father to Tommy when necessary. The guilt about her death had prevented me from fully embracing my role as Tommy's primary emotional support, leaving space for toxic influences to fill that gap. The financial changes created unexpected opportunities. The $8,400 I'd recovered from canceling my parents' cruise became the foundation for Tommy's college fund. The $3,200 I'd been paying monthly for their mortgage now funded enrichment activities, improved health care, and a more secure emergency fund for our own family. Most importantly, I was able to establish a trust fund that would ensure Tommy's education and well-being regardless of what happened to me. Sarah's life insurance money, which I'd been reluctant to invest for his future, while supporting extended family, was now properly managed and growing for Tommy's long-term benefit. 6 weeks after the financial separation, Jennifer called with a surprising request. I want to talk, she said without her usual demanding tone. Not about money, about our family. We met at a coffee shop near my office on a Saturday morning while Tommy was at acting class. Jennifer looked tired and older somehow, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, instead of her usual designer clothes. Marcus is in gambling addiction treatment, she said without preamble. Has been for 3 weeks. I set down my coffee cup, genuinely surprised by her honesty. The mortgage thing was never really about the house, she continued. Marcus has been borrowing against our savings for poker games and sports betting. I thought if we could get into a bigger house with a lower payment, I could hide the financial damage and maybe fix things. Why are you telling me this? Because I realized something after you cut off Mom and Dad's money. They've been enabling Marcus too. Every time they gave us cash for household expenses, most of it went to his gambling. I didn't want to see it, but I can't pretend anymore. Jennifer's admission revealed a complexity to the family dysfunction I hadn't understood. My parents weren't just favoring her children, they were actively funding an addiction that was destroying her marriage. What does this mean for Ashley and Blake? It means they need stability, not expensive gifts from grandparents who don't actually understand them. Do you know what Ashley said last week? She said she doesn't trust presents anymore because they usually come with strings attached. That observation from a 7-year-old was heartbreakingly astute. Even the favored grandchildren had learned to be wary of my parents' manipulative generosity. I want to apologize for the costume thing, Jennifer continued, and for everything else. I've been jealous of your success for years, and I let Mom and Dad use that against you and Tommy. Why the change of heart? Because Ashley asked me why Uncle Frederick doesn't bring Tommy to family dinners anymore. I realized I didn't have a good answer that didn't make us sound like terrible people. Over the next hour, Jennifer revealed the extent of our parents' manipulation. They had been telling her for years that I was too proud to accept help, while simultaneously telling me that she needed constant financial support because of Marcus's unemployment issues. They'd played us against each other while positioning themselves as the generous family patriarchs. I want to try again, Jennifer said as our conversation wound down. Real relationship this time. No money involved, no competition, no favoritism. Just siblings trying to raise our kids right. I agreed to limited contact with clear boundaries. Jennifer would need to prove her commitment to change through actions, not words. But the conversation gave me hope that not all family relationships were irreparably damaged. My parents, however, remained locked in denial and anger. They had stopped calling directly, but continued to send passive-aggressive emails and cards to Tommy with messages like, "We miss you so much," and grandparents' love is unconditional. I intercepted these communications and discussed them with Dr. Williams, who confirmed they were attempts to manipulate Tommy's emotions against me. 3 months after the financial separation, Carol and Bob made one final attempt at reconciliation. They appeared at Tommy's Saturday acting class with expensive gifts and apologies. Tommy, now 7 years old and more confident than ever, politely thanked them for the presents but told them he couldn't accept gifts from people who had hurt his feelings. My dad taught me that presents should come from love, not guilt. He explained with startling clarity for a child his age. The interaction was witnessed by other parents and theater staff who later commented on Tommy's poise and emotional intelligence. My son had learned to set healthy boundaries by watching me model them consistently. That evening, Carol called one last time. "We're moving to Florida," she said without emotion. "Bob's pension goes further there, and Jennifer can't support us here anymore. I hope you'll be happy there." "This is all your fault, Frederick. We gave you everything and you destroyed our family over a stupid costume. We gave ourselves a chance at a healthy relationship, Mom. You chose to reject that in favor of maintaining dysfunction. Don't expect any relationship with us going forward. We're done." She hung up and I felt an unexpected sense of relief. The threat of their approval or disapproval had hung over my decisions for 32 years. Now it was gone forever, and I was free to parent Tommy based on love and wisdom rather than fear and guilt. A year later, our new life had settled into patterns that felt natural and sustainable. Tommy was thriving in school, making friends easily, and developing confidence in his abilities. His acting classes had led to piano lessons, which revealed an unexpected musical talent that Sarah would have adored. Jennifer kept her word about rebuilding our relationship. She and the twins visited regularly, and I was amazed to discover that Ashley and Blake were actually delightful children when they weren't being spoiled and manipulated by their grandparents. Without the pressure of competing for adult attention through elaborate gifts and favors, they relaxed into normal kid behavior. Marcus completed his gambling addiction program and found steady work as a maintenance supervisor. They were renting a modest apartment that fit their actual budget, and Jennifer had returned to part-time nursing to rebuild their savings. The twins were learning the value of money and the satisfaction of earning privileges through good choices rather than having them handed out arbitrarily. Most importantly, Tommy was developing into a child who expected to be treated with respect and kindness. He advocated for himself when other kids were shared generously with friends, and showed empathy for people who were struggling. The confident, caring boy he was becoming would have made Sarah incredibly proud. On the second anniversary of Sarah's death, Tommy and I visited her grave with flowers and a recording of him singing a song he'd learned in music class. As we sat beside her headstone, he asked a question that had been on his mind. "Daddy, do you think Mommy would be proud of how we handled Grandma and Grandpa?" I thought carefully before answering. Sarah had valued family loyalty, but she'd valued integrity and protection of innocent people more. "I think Mommy would be proud that we chose love over fear," I said, "and that we protected our family from people who wanted to hurt it, even though it made them sad. Sometimes protecting someone you love means disappointing people who don't love them properly." Tommy nodded solemnly, then brightened as he remembered something else. "Mrs. Patterson said I can audition for the lead in next year's school musical. Will you help me practice?" "Every single day, buddy. We'll make sure you're completely prepared." As we walked back to the car, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The costume theft that had seemed so devastating 18 months ago now looked like a gift. It had forced me to confront dysfunction I'd been enabling for years and choose my son's well-being over my parents' approval. The financial cost of supporting toxic family members had been nearly $1 million. The emotional cost to Tommy's self-worth had been immeasurable. But the greatest cost would have been failing to honor the promise I'd made to Sarah about protecting our boy. Sometimes the greatest act of love is setting boundaries that force people to confront their own behavior. Protecting your child's emotional well-being requires protecting your own dignity first. Financial generosity without emotional respect is simply enabling dysfunction that hurts everyone involved. True family celebrates every member's success, equally supports each person's growth unconditionally, and creates environments where children feel valued for who they are rather than how they compare to their cousins. When family members can't or won't provide that foundation, choosing your child's future over their approval isn't betrayal. It's the right choice every time. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting someone you love from emotional harm? Sometimes the people who claim to love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest, and breaking free from that cycle takes incredible courage. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Share this with someone who might need to hear that choosing healthy boundaries over toxic relationships is not only acceptable, it's necessary. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember that your worth isn't determined by how much you're willing to sacrifice for people who don't appreciate it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from dysfunction and build the life your loved ones actually deserve. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.